We are live.
Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Catherine Same, and I am an associate professor of gender and sexuality studies at UC Irvine and one of the editors of Jadalia's Iran page. On behalf of our editorial team, which includes Manijeh Moradian, Negar Razavi, and Navid Mansouri, I am so thrilled to be hosting today's conversation with this amazing group of feminist activists, artists, and scholars. Thank you so much to our fearless leader, our dear comrade Bassam Haddad, for supporting this event and our work on the Iran page, and the rest of the Jadalia team, particularly Duna Dabas and Kate Greenman, for their work on this event. Thank you also to our co-sponsors, the SCAR School of Policy and Government, the Center for Global Islamic Studies, and the Middle East and Islamic Studies program, all at George Mason University, and the Arab Studies Institute in Washington, D.C. and Beirut. Just over 1 year ago, 22-year-old Jina Mahsa Amini was arrested and detained by the morality police in Tehran for improper hijab. Brutally beaten, she died in police custody. Amini, an ethnic Kurdish woman, was from the city of Saqqez in Kurdistan province in northwestern Iran. The significance of Amini's ethnic Kurdish identity cannot be emphasized enough. The slogan, Zan Zendegi Azadi, in Farsi, meaning woman, life, freedom, is adapted from the Kurdish slogan, Jin, Jian, Azadi. It was developed by the Kurdish women's movement, which has long emphasized the centrality of women to the struggle for a free society. The Woman, Life, Freedom uprising in Iran captured the attention and imagination of the world, offering a wellspring of inspiration, joy, beauty, and hope for the countless activists and everyday citizens fighting the connected global pandemics of patriarchal authoritarianism, state violence, and imperialism in their own contexts. The death of Amini came on the heels of several long-brewing crises in Iran, including the profound mismanagement of the economy and the COVID pandemic by the government, sustained water and pollution crises, an extended drought, high inflation, and food and fuel shortages, which for years had been eroding the middle class and squashing any remaining hopes and dreams of better days to come. Maximum pressure sanctions regimes and geopolitical isolation have only compounded the dismal life circumstances of many Iranians and strengthened the state's rationale for securitization against encroachments by the West. Like some of his predecessors, hard-right President Raisi has wrought national security through crackdowns on dissent and surveillance of women's dress. The violence against and ultimate death of Jina Mahsa Amini thus tapped the widespread immiseration and profound anger and despair of women, religious and ethnic minorities, students, workers, and ordinary citizens who have lost faith in the reform strategies they invested in for many decades. They were now unified in their demand for an end to the Islamic Republic. Over the past weekend, cities and towns around the world held rallies and marches to mark the anniversary of Amini's death and the uprising, and to draw attention to the fact that while Iranians have experienced heightened security, violence, and blowback from the authorities, the movement certainly is still alive. Today, we will look back at this historic moment, consider the significance and many dimensions of this feminist uprising, and explore what is happening with the struggle now in Iran and the diaspora. So let me introduce our fantastic discussants. Morasheen Alayari is a New York-based Iranian Kurdish artist using 3D simulation, video, sculpture, and digital fabrication as tools to refigure myth and history. Through archival practices and storytelling, her work weaves together complex counter-narratives in opposition to the lasting influence of Western technological colonialism in the context of Middle East and North Africa. Morasheen has been part of numerous exhibitions, festivals, and workshops around the world, including the Venice Biennial, New Museum, the Whitney Museum of American Art, Pompidou Center, Museum of Contemporary Art in Montreal, Tate Modern, Queens Museum, and Dallas Museum of Art. She is the recipient of the United States Artists Fellowship, the Joan Mitchell Foundation, Painters and Sculptors Grant, the Sundance Institute Frontier International Fellowship, and the Leading Global Thinkers of 2016 Award by Foreign Policy Magazine. as one of the Iran editorial team members said, she's a big deal in the art world. So welcome, Morasheen. Dr. Esha Momeni is an Iranian-American scholar and activist. She received her PhD in gender studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, where she is currently a lecturer. In addition, she holds a master's degree in mass communication. Her research and teaching specializations include modern Iran and the Middle East, media and popular culture, and gender and sexuality. Her activism started in 2006 when she joined the 1 Million Signatures campaign, a non-hierarchical movement demanding an end to discriminatory laws against women in Iran. Since then, she has been engaged in various projects concerning gender in the Middle East. Following the tragic killing of Jina Mahsa, she has been actively involved in 2 projects, including Peyvandistan.com, a website designed to chart the diverse groups within the movement and serve as a platform for activists to foster connections and collaborate on their work. And Sama Khosravi Urad is a feminist activist and new media studies and digital cultures researcher based just in Sweden, but now just in London. She is a member of the fantastic transnational network Feminist for Jina, and they've been doing such incredible work in the last year. And Sama is feeling under the weather today, but was gracious enough to be here and participate. So we thank her, and we thank all of you for being here. Welcome. And thank you so much for your work. So first, let's sort of look back at the early days of the uprising. Each of you grew up in Iran and you've been in close contact with people on the ground. So you have a kind of, different experience than those who have been in the diaspora for a long time. So what was it like for you to witness this uprising and to be in contact with people on the ground in Iran? Can you talk a little bit about that? Just sort of remembering particularly the early days. Do you want to start, Esha? Okay.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, and say hello to our audience. So in the past 30 years, there has been a major political uprising in Iran every decade. And I was present and participated in 2 of them. One was the student protest of July 1999, which is known as Kuye Daneshgah, and then 2009 Green Movement. And both of them, just being there and being part of it, has been one of the some of the most profound experiences in my life. But emotionally, every time there is a surge of uprising in Iran, it's very challenging. And it's not just challenging for me. I know I talk to activist fellows, and we all go through these very hard emotional phase. And I believe it's what's scary about it is hope. And it's scary because with hope comes also it invites disappointment and a heartbreak, which I think that's what whenever there is an uprising. But I believe this is different because I believe in Generation Z. I think they grew up very differently from us. I think they don't have the traumas that we have, and they're unstoppable. So I'm hopeful this time, not scared.
I'll just go. Hi, and thanks everyone for being here. Honored to be sharing the virtual stage with so many amazing minds. So, I think kind of going back to also a little bit of what Esha mentioned, these kind of uprisings and what then became known as Jina Revolution, it is not new. We all have been around a lot of different moments of, as you see, trying to grasp to, as you said, this moment of hope. But I think one thing that was different with this very specific moment, for me also personally, but also for many other people, was this uprising starting with a death of a person. And that person being in a marginalized community, connecting to a whole struggle of, Kurdish people and not just in Iran, but a much more complicated decades of struggles of Kurdish population in the other parts of the Middle East. So for me, those two things was something that perhaps was a different shift that then brought a different focus on women, their bodies, and marginalized people. Obviously, again, starting from Jina Mahsa Amini being from the Kurdish population in Iran. So, but also, yeah, as Eshal said, all those moments of hope come with perhaps disappointment. But I remember this very like drastic disconnection between like even like our generation and our parents' generation. I remember having conversation with my mom and her saying something like, okay, this is another of those like moments of uprising. It's going to end soon. You know, nothing is going to happen or change. But for the first time, I saw something very different between us as a generation and obviously Generation Z, but also something that happened in the diaspora that was very, very different than any previous uprisings, which that I think we gave each other the permission to each experience and participate in this movement from wherever we were standing. You know, that very popular saying that هر جا هستی یه قدم جلو بردار, like wherever you are, just take a step forward, which means that we understand you're not in Iran. We understand you're not in the streets fighting, but you are in diaspora. You are in some kind of maybe self-exile. You are dealing with, you know, some kind of connection with what's unfolding in the country. And we will give each other this permission for each of us to participate in this movement and this uprising, in this revolution from wherever we are standing, and our positionality. So I think that was a huge shift that opened up many possibilities that later on, I'm sure we can discuss further.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me, and hello to the audience. I am very happy to be here with you and with the discussants today. So if I'm going to talk about my own feelings, there have been quite a lot of affects and feelings on me as a woman and on my body as a political body. So it has been quite difficult for me to kind of digest the dynamics of this evolving, because as a woman who has lived in Iran for over 30 years of her life and who has been under arrest in the same detention centers for just having a so-called improper hijab. So this has been quite traumatizing for many of us, for generations and for decades. But at the same time, we know that this has not been just for the compulsory hijab, that when this whole uprising and the Jina feminist revolt started, many of us were kind of a bit of a in a hopeless state, because just some years ago, the Bloody November happened, and thousands of people were killed in the streets, and under the brutal shutdown of the internet globally, and which was not known to the global world what happened for days and for months. And also at the kind of epistemic level, I was quite desperate, because I was quite hopeless that why no one is talking about what is actually happening in the streets in Iran, what is happening with regard to the mobilizing and to the voices of resistance of people. So there were a lot of these ambivalences, and me as a woman in the diasporic within the diasporic communities and the academic world, I was feeling that there is this existing intentional ignorance that is going on, that no one actually wants to challenge the regime at all, and everyone is just so afraid, basically. And so when this happened in September 22, a group of us kind of organized an open letter about listen to the voices of feminist revolution in Iran, and we try to kind of say that this is beyond this binary of, for example, the U.S. imperialism or the Middle East kind of authoritarianism. This is beyond that, and we need to listen to the voices of the people who are fighting for their liberty, like barehanded. And so it was both a feeling of despair and suspicion, and also when the time passed, it was also a very much of a liberating feeling for me and for many of my friends and my community. So, and it gradually also strengthened this feeling of hopefulness and emancipation. So I think these different ambivalences and affects are quite important to address right now, and that we are sitting together.
Thank you so much, all of you. Absolutely. And there are several things that you've each said that will sort of pick up the threads and kind of carry on the conversation. Hope, I think this question of permission in the diaspora, I want to come back to that. But before we talk about that, can you talk about the organizing going on today in Iran? I mean, you know, sort of mainstream media would present this as like, you know, this happened and this is done, and now it's all security and violence and surveillance, which of course the authorities have, you know, there really has been an incredible blowback, but clearly, you know, everywhere people still organize in different kinds of ways. So can you talk about, you know, what you know from your context, what's in your work, what's going on sort of on the ground in Iran now? Whoever wants to start, maybe we can go the other way. Maybe Sama, you'd like to start.
I could start to briefly say something about the brutal arrest and the suppression of the feminist activists right before the anniversary of the Jina revolution. And it was quite predictable that the authorities would go after these feminist activists right before the anniversary. But then the scale of it was also quite shocking. Weeks before the anniversary, authorities invaded the houses of feminist activists in Gilan, north of Iran, and arrested Jelva Jawahiri, for example, Forough Saminiya, and the other activists. And like even Saman Asghari, Atif Rangiz, they're still in prison. Some of them got released on bail, but many of them are still in prison. So it's because of the anniversary, but also because how the regime is kind of scared and afraid of these feminist activists and ongoing field on the ground activism in Iran. But at the same time, something hopeful and very radical that has happened and has kind of continued to take shape is the formation of local anonymous committees that have taken shape in different cities and different provinces. For example, I could mention the Revolutionary Youth of Mahabat Province Committee, or the Anonymous Women's Committee, or the Gilan Revolt Committee, and all of these committees that have found each other, by the way, and are ongoing and are doing activism on the ground, mobilizing and doing resistance on the ground, is quite impressive. Of course, it's not just limited to the to this year, to the kind of aftermath of the Jina revolution. There has been other numerous anonymous collectives, communities who have been mobilizing for years. One of which I could mention Komite Sazmande, the organization of workers' rights committee, something like that. So these committees have been kind of reaching out to each other and have been mobilizing for years. But this year was quite impressive that even small provinces and even those cities that are under huge suppression by the regime, like the Kurdish regions, are also reaching to each other and mobilizing. So it's quite impressive and hopeful, I would say.
Thanks, Samajan, for those names. I wanted to mention some of the names you already mentioned, but I would say that I like to actually like think that there is a lot of grassroots radical kind of gatherings and collective buildings that are happening inside Iran that we actually don't know about. I am, I don't live there, so it's hard to like really pinpoint anything like without like being in certain spaces. But for me personally, since the Jina uprising since last year at around this time, there has been a lot of trying to kind of build connections with friends and feminists and activists, especially like artists that are in Iran that are, my friends from the time that I was at Tehran University at the social science department, which was, one of the very like political departments at the university in Iran. But that has been something to kind of like try to like build some kind of bridge between what's happening in Iran and kind of the work that we're trying to do outside of Iran. And yeah, so that has been also, again, like a really kind of going back to what I was saying, a very like new experience about the way that we are able to come together in these worlds of being inside and outside of Iran. And I've witnessed that with a lot of other groups that are doing this kind of work, that I feel like to be able to do this work outside of Iran, it is necessary to kind of find some kind of anchor points and connections with people who are underground in the streets or in the basements doing the kind of work that they need to be doing. And yeah, so I kind of hope that I will be able to continue building those structures, building those bridges with what's unfolding there.
I think I want to emphasize on a very important change that has happened with this movement, and Morishin is talking about it, and that's how the relationship between inside and outside. And because 10 years ago, there was all these discussions about who has the right to even have an opinion about political events in Iran, and that doesn't exist anymore. And it makes it, organizing in Iran is extremely difficult. And like Samajan said, Jelve and, these are like the activists and feminists that we know and, we are in contact with. It's they're under surveillance, they're arrested. If they're not arrested, that doesn't mean they're free, because you get constant calls, you get unexpected visits, you have to go, you get calls, you have to go and talk to them. So it's like, it's not just because they're not in prison, that doesn't mean they're free, which makes our role, especially our generation role outside of Iran, much more important to the movement. And I think we can help to create a platform where things can happen inside Iran.
Again, many follow-up questions. I have, we're going to talk about what you've all addressed, which is, what has changed in terms of this inside-outside relationship, the permission, right? The conditions that led to that kind of feeling of certain barriers being broken. But before we do that, as there have been a lot of comparisons of this movement to the 1979 revolution. I mean, the word sort of revolution appearing in new kinds of ways here. Now, of course, we know this is a different moment. Obviously, in the 1979 revolution, sort of women's freedom and other marginalized groups' freedom, as in most revolutions historically, was deferred to a later date. But this moment, obviously, women and girls have been so central, and feminism as not just capturing who the political actors are, but as a kind of deep vision and practice has been so present. So this is kind of maybe a theoretical question, but let's ground it in this moment. I mean, do we have a kind of different conception of revolution with this moment? There's obviously a lot of fatigue. There had been a lot of fatigue about even the concept of revolution because of the many failures and the disappointments and the sort of affective sense of despair and going between hope and despair that you've talked about, Thama. But do we have a new model? Do we need a new model? Could we think about revolution as a process potentially that helps us toggle between these different modes of possibility and constraint? Or was this perhaps the first feminist revolution? I wonder if you could speak to that set of kind of questions.
I can go. I think it depends on how we define a revolution. If we define it as major structural change, then knowing that hijab has been crucial to the formation of Islamic Republic identity, this is definitely a revolution. It's a social, cultural, and gender revolution. And I like to say that we've to some point succeeded as hijab is not being enforced right now in Iran. And when the way it was enforced, and organizing and thinking about how we can be effective in a time that states have been heavily militarized, and the surveillance technology that they have it seems impossible to compete with that. And but I think because of social media and connectivity and internet and culture can rapidly change, and we own the culture. And I think we can through culture we can really get to the political changes that we want. And we observe that in the United States, right? How a culture shifted policy changes in here. And when I was teaching at UCLA 10 years ago as a TA in gender studies, the way we spoke about gender was very different than the way we now speak about it. And one of the main changes is the concept of freedom. Iranians have seeking freedom for the past 120 years. And in every major political change, freedom has been one of the main desires, one of the main wants. But the definition of freedom has always been problematic. If we are defining freedom, are we okay with sexual freedom? These are all questions that have been asked in different eras. Are we okay with religious freedom? And every time that I actually did research on the concept of freedom and how freedom was understood and approached in each of these political moments. And there was always restrictions. There was always concerns with freedom, as if, because as soon as you restrict freedom, there's no freedom. So I think this new generation Z, because of the different experiences they have, because of their worldview, I think the way they understand freedom and the way they're asking for it is different. And it's I think they do desire and also understand what freedom means.
Yeah, and Esha, kind of continuing what you were saying, I think they also practice it very differently than how our generation was doing it. So one thing kind of that I've been thinking a lot about is that moment of shift from calling it an uprising to a revolution, and a lot of conversations around it, as Esha mentioned, kind of like this big structure change that now happened. But also kind of in addition to that, I feel like sometimes we need naming as a way to then build something around that naming. The past decades, there has been a lot of uprising in Iran, and even the Green movement became a movement. And I think when you calling it, naming it, this name of revolution, there is something there. There is this almost pushing for, this is not gonna just end. This is not gonna be another uprising. This is not gonna be a movement. We are gonna follow up. We are gonna push through. We are gonna see this as something that now has given us an opportunity to shift, to change the ways that all these like previous other uprisings and movements has happened, and all the learnings, all these like experiences that we have gathered. It's almost like a blood memory, right? It's that we have with us. Now we are gonna kind of use those as a way to do something else with this moment, and that gives me for sure like a lot of hope, a lot of pathway. It's like opening up different pathway in a way that I personally didn't feel like was opened up.
Just adding to that, I was asking a friend how does it feel just walking in streets of Tehran without scarf or without hijab, and just trying to imagine it. And in terms of experience, in terms of feeling, in terms of what it seems to me who live there and tried, it's definitely a revolution. It feels like a revolution.
Yeah, and following up on both Esha and Marashin, I would also call this a feminist revolution, and also maybe add what Parvin Ardalan would say, a feminist revolution in the making, because as Esha also mentioned, that for a revolution to be realized, we need a structural change to kind of take place and to be practiced at many levels. But at the same time, the shift that Marashin talks about is really crucial, because with this feminist revolt or feminist revolution in the making, we see that it's not just another uprising happening in Iran where certain demands are shouted in the streets, or certain political party demands are kind of asked for. But at the same time, it's precisely because of this feminist aspect of this revolution. It's intersectional. It happened at the intersections of the ethnic minorities, at the gender aims, and all of these things that have been going on for years. So we see the previous uprisings, previous revolts, such as the 2017 and 18 protests against economic crisis and austerities. We see the 2021 protests in Khuzestan against the shortage of water. We see even those micro-political protests, like the Sepide Rashno protests in the bus, that kind of went quite viral, and the Girls of Enqilab Street movement, of course. And all of this kind of prepared this the society for a moment that when this earthquake called Jina Revolution happened, people were already demanding all of these things and struggling for and fighting for their rights and for their demands for years. And so at the same time, this feminist revolution is a shift, because it also essentially reconsiders what is and who is what constitutes and who is a political subject. Because is it just a male cis Shiite body that can be a political game changer or a political revolutionary? Or can women, trans, queer bodies, and youth bodies become also political in a feminist and revolutionary way? So I think this is quite a radical shift in the previous movements, but also a continuation of that, which is also what makes it quite feminist in that sense, and very, very impressive. And I agree with Catherine that we could maybe call this one of the most impressive feminist movements and revolution in the making globally.
Let's keep on this, because this is, such a beautiful, this is what gives us hope, right? I think a lot of what you're all speaking to, which is the the kind of relationship between, as Sama, you pointing out, the sort of conditions in place for many years for people to, sort of protest and come together, but also what you, Aisha, have been speaking to, and Marcin as well, the sort of the generational component, the fact that this generation is part of the world in a different kind of way. And then, so the social, this idea that we own the culture, we own the sort of everyday intimate revolution. Can you talk specifically about sort of what some of those practices are? I mean, yes, the sort of intersectional, the kind of bringing together of different kinds of bodies and people in coalition, but talk a little bit more about what you see as the difference between this moment and other moments in terms of those very sort of political or, relational practices on the street. And also a sort of related question is, how do you understand the particular feminism here? Is it a feminism of this new generation? And if so, where does that come from? To what extent does genealogy or genealogy or the Kurdish women's liberation movement kind of inform that deep intersectional, it's not just about one kind of body, but all of these different social and political actors. How would you, if you had to sort of articulate it, what is the particular feminism being expressed here? You've all sort of said, like, there's something different. We're moving beyond this binary, right? Of, either the sort of Western feminists or the kind of authentic Muslim woman. What's going on here? And can you talk about the, what's being expressed in terms of concepts, but also practices?
I mean, I think calling it a transnational feminist movement is something that, or wanting it to be that, is something that I've been discussing with a lot of different friends, colleagues, people that are doing this, activists that are doing this kind of organizing. Recently I was in conversation with a friend who went to one of these bigger feminist conferences that was organized by different Iranian feminist activists. And one thing we talked about was that, she felt quite disappointed about actually the lack of focus on trans and queer bodies, and kind of a bit of still some parts of maybe like older generation of Iranian feminist movements kind of being very focused on women bodies, without the X in the E section of women as wording, as the focus, which is, again, I think what we don't want to repeat is what has happened to us for many, many years under a patriarchal culture, which is that as soon as we would want to talk about women and women's rights and hijab, it would always be like, oh, this is not a time, just stay in line, So what we don't want to do is that to trans and queer bodies and queer communities and trans communities, who, or any other marginalized communities, who with this moment should be for all those marginalized communities. This saying that we are not free until we are all free, right? That's something to really like take with us. And I already see a lot of conversations, Feminist for Jina, for example, as like one of my like favorite networks of different communities coming together. But at the same time, again, I feel like this is a very crucial moment to make sure that we do we bring justice into the way that all the bodies can be included as we go through this in the making feminist transnational feminist movements.
Aisha or Sama, do you have anything to add?
Sama, I can go if. I think it's very important to question two very dominant concepts that are used to refer to Middle Eastern women. One is equating Middle Eastern women with Muslim women, which I find very Orientalist, and actually is one of the main reasons that U.S. American feminists have hard time to talk about what's happening in Iran. And if you in Iran, if you ask Iranians themselves, Iranian women, I'm not sure how many of them would identify as Muslim at this moment. And the other thing is generations of patriarchal culture. If we know that colonialism and power always rewriting the history to their own benefit. Why don't we question the way our history has been taught to us, the way our history has been told? And when you look back to our history, you actually find that before constitutional revolution, before the modern Western patriarchal state is imported to Iran, women have a good share of power, economic power, because unlike Europe, Muslim women, Islam allowed women to own land. So women had elite women had and middle upper class women did have economic power, and women the workers, they always also participated in politics, and women, working class women usually do have power because of how they contribute to the economy of the family. And that when you read the history, if the price of bread in Iran is always, as soon as it's changed a penny, women are in the streets. They write, they write letters and they send it to officials. But it's just our history is not told the way that it happened. And the past 100 years has been the systematic oppression of women, feminization of poverty. And it's for the same reason that every major movement in the region is somehow marked by gender. What is this obsession with gender? Taliban, is Islamic Republic. And it's if we were oppressed, why are they spending so much money and energy to oppress us? Because when there's tension, when there's resistance, that's when that it shows that actually we have power. So I see this as actually going back to claiming the power we had. So we were one of these groups that we formed, and hopefully I get a chance to talk about it. We wanted to actually name it, Feminists for Freedom, fifth generation, to just show the continuity of the gender awareness in Iran. During the constitution, Iranian women funded the first national bank. Iranian women were at the forefront of tobacco, the banning, right, and against Russia. And then and then we all grew up with powerful women in our families. So I think this is not. If we look, and also what we see in Syria, like with Rojava, and basically that is the most radical feminist event in our history that's it's not really noticed, especially by Western feminists. So, which also shows the roots of our history, when you look at, the gender in there. So I think it's important that to understand this moment in the history, we look differently in our own history.
And I could only add to this by saying, like, regarding the question that you had, like, what makes this movement as intersectional in practice? Because I think it's also related to what Insha Murshin was saying, but also the slogan Jinjian Azadi, it originated in the Kurdish movement, within the Kurdish liberation movement, and also the fact that Jina Amini was Kurdish herself, and the slogan was shouted in Aichi symmetry. And then I think we owe a lot of this, the progress of this movement to the Kurdish movement inside the country, and how how it comes from a tradition of years and decades of resistance by these communities, and it is really crucial to emphasize on this, and also the intersectionality of this movement have been also a decolonization process that has happened from within the country. We, for the first time, hear voices of Baluch women, Dastgoharan, who have started to talk about their demands and the specific and unique ways that they have been oppressed within the multiplicity of the geography of Iran. And so these are the things that makes this movement quite intersectional in practice and in theory. And so yeah, I think this history of oppression and resistance is quite key to what makes this movement be the movement that it is now.
Thank you so much. I think we could have a whole panel on this particular topic alone, but let's kind of come back to the diaspora and the kinds of organizing that you've all been doing, and you know, and if you could elaborate, you know, what is it about this moment where you felt a kind of new permission or freedom to mobilize? Because, you know, obviously working in the diaspora, you're navigating so many constraints, right? But this moment was so amazing in that it broke that barrier. You know, you could articulate and feel a certain freedom to be both anti you know, authoritarianism and anti-imperialism, instead of, you know, choosing one or the other, you know, depending on your audience. Just like this is what so many people are fighting. They're fighting on both fronts. So maybe I'll direct sort of the question in different ways. You know, Aisha, you have a long history of women's rights work, and maybe you could talk about your projects, particularly Peyvandistan, and then Morishine, if you want to talk about, you're involved in a lot of different art projects, but maybe the Begu Collective, and also the role of art and artists in the uprising, which you know, is such a visual, rich visual archive of protest. And then Sama, if you could talk maybe more about your work in Feminist Virginia, Gina, the kind of things that you're doing. So whoever wants to go first, but maybe talk about your specific work. I can call on someone. So why don't you start, Morishine?
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of want to talk about a couple of like moments that, you know, this shift we're talking about of like this like permission thing that we talked about a little bit, I felt it really like deeply. So the first weeks of you know, everything that was like unfolding in Iran after the death of Jina Amini, you know, obviously there was a lot of kind of internet shutdown. As we all know, the Iranian government has been doing this with any kind of uprising movements, etc. And also this perhaps need that I felt like kind of like this voice that was like heard a lot, that like we need this to be heard globally. We need this to be seen as something that is like everyday unfolding, and like a bit of collaboration between people who are inside of Iran and outside of Iran to, you know, share these things, to put them outside on your social media. I remember a moment when my friend, a really close friend of mine in Iran, every day she would go to the 2 streets and then come back and then would send me videos and pictures of everything like she had like taken on that day through Instagram. And then she would be like, I'm going to delete them from my phone, so you save them. So, you know, kind of like these moments of, again, like almost having to build a system, a network of collaborating with each other inside and outside of Iran as a way to kind of be in this moment of whatever that was like happening, but to help each other out, for these voices to be amplified, these events to be amplified. And with that, I think, I also found new connections and new network of friends that we wanted to do something together. Like, we were just talking a lot online anyway, because there was so much emotion to process. And also being in diaspora, there was this very like intense moments of just absolute silence from, as Ish also mentioned, like Western American, North American, white feminism, just in general, I would say like global North feminism. There was this like silent that we kind of felt like we had to found each other in a way that was very deep. Like I still feel like the connections I've made with other activists, artists, etc., because of what we want to do since last year is so different than anything else any kind of organizing that I've done. Is very different. It's so deep. And with Pegu Collective, for example, we are a small group of artists, and exactly what you say, this revolution has been so visual, right? The figure of the female body, the performative kind of aspect of it, in terms of like women holding their scarf or like burning their scarf, or like making like again these like symbolic visual moments. There was this article that came out, maybe some of you have read it, by Elle, which was about this figurative kind of aspect of this revolution. So for us, when we came together, we talked about many different projects that we were doing, but one thing that we are working on is building an archive of images and videos of the last 1 year, the important parts of it that have women, marginalized, queer, etc. bodies as its center. Because obviously there's like so many material, we can't gather all of it, but we already are like building this archive of like, it will be like thousands of images and material. And so documenting these moments of that I personally think we could use a bit of like better practice of documenting and archival work. One of the only documentations, like video, film, whatever, photography documentations of the 1979 Iran, feminist revolution has been done by a group of like French women filmmakers, right? So with this, as artists, as activists, we're like, we have to build an archive that kind of does justice to what's happening as much as possible. And yeah, so for us, that's like one project. There are other projects, but just to kind of end it with this, that I don't know how it's been for you, Esha and Sama, but I really feel like to be in diaspora and almost not have anything that will give you this feeling of being sustained or anchored with other people around you, friends that I was very close with that are my American friends, etc. Again, like the silence felt like just so heartbreaking, and for that, this moment of finding each other has been really, really meaningful.
Maybe I could go, because it really resonates with me as well, this feeling of finding each other and kind of sharing multiple affects, as I said in the beginning, that has been kind of heavy on our bodies for long, but also this feeling of wanting to do something transnationally, and also echoing the voices of resistance inside the country has been quite key for many of us. So when this Feminist for Jina network was created, and when people and activists, scholars, artists found each other to form this network of transnational feminist collective who are based in many cities around the world, have found each other. They built, we are trying to build this network based on these multiplicities of experiences and learnings from our lived experiences, but our learning experiences from each other and from our colleagues and comrades inside the country. So I think this has been quite key for the aim of the Feminists for Jina network, which is, as I said, is quite active in many cities, mobilizing for demonstrations for International Workers' Day, for 8th of March, and most recently for the anniversary of the Jina revolt. And this is not just about mobilizing demonstration, street demonstration. It's also a counter hegemonic kind of discourse against these dominant discourses on dominant media regimes. And this has been quite key to build a movement from below, a network from below that tries to aim for a movement building and solidarity building that is not kind of dependent on certain political regimes or certain governments and so on. And this has been ongoing since the early days of the Jina revolution, with the slogan that has been going on, Jinjian Azadi, that has been going on for years. But then this became the Jina name became the symbol of our fight, as we say it a lot in our demonstrations. So I think this movement building and the countering of the hegemonic discourses has been quite key, not just within the network, but also to find other internationalist feminist communities and networks, not just and I think it was Esha who mentioned something about the blurring of the inside-outside divide that has been quite key for the Jina revolt so far. I do agree, because one thing that Feminists for Jina network has been quite trying to do is to not just not just echo the voices of resistance of people inside the country, which has been the core element of this network, but also to build communities and network outside of Iran, to those communities and collectives who are fighting against all oppressive and capitalist systems, which is not just residing in the Middle East or based in the Middle East. They are everywhere, and they are rising. The fascist far-right forces all over the world, they are rising. So finding these collectives and finding coalitions is quite key for a network that calls itself a feminist intersectional network. Yeah.
I kind of want to add also to that's also been a very important learning lesson, that we're not in a canon, like what the feminist, yes, this what's been happening in Iran, this revolution is one of the most kind of perhaps important and vital movements that has been happening in the 21st century, perhaps. But again, to understand that the history of other feminist movements and uprising, and especially in the global South, you look at Chile, you look at India and Pakistan, Egypt, etc. And we can learn a lot from Palestine and the fight for liberation. So to understand also that connecting with other movement, uprising, revolutions, other political activists and parties that has, they've been active and they've had experiences of both success and failures, and to learn from those experiences, I think is really important. One of the things that is in my wish list of project is for us to do more translation work, more kind of programming around these kind of again, like movements and activist practices that has been in global South, which I personally think that there is a little bit of a gap there in terms of trying to, again, build a network, build a connection with them in a way that feels like we're all also fighting for something bigger than just women's rights, let's say, in Iran.
First, before I beat myself up for a week for giving wrong information, the tobacco protests were against British rule. I think I said Russia. Continuing what Morrishin says and about the importance of finding each other and uniting and creating that coalition and solidarity. I think that's one of the big challenges, or maybe the main task that we have at this moment. When right after revolution, many groups were emerged and they're mostly still active. And one thing that I thought really waste our energy and resources is how we are not connected. There's no mapping, and we don't know who's doing what. Especially, like, we know, as an activist, I'm connected to feminists of Iran, but so many other people got active who didn't have the experience. So with two of my friends, one is dear artist Mamak Khadem, we created this website, payvandistan.com, to map the movement. And so the groups go there and they enter their information, anything that's public, because it's also always a security issue. So we can see which groups, and by location. So it's by location. We can see which groups are active in areas. So individuals can, not only groups can find each other, so they don't do the same thing. They can, unite and, work more efficiently. But also individuals can go to this website, and it's like a yellow page. Go to this website and find the groups that are active in the area, or they're, they're transnational. And they can join them.
It's so exciting and moving. I was struck by, someone mentioned the article by Elle about, sort of the body and protest on the street. And just to plug Jadaliyya, that a translation of that article is published on the Iran page of Jadaliyya. And something that you've been talking about, finding each other. It's sort of resonant, in fact, with some of the things that that article spoke to about, finding this relationship with each other on the street in a new kind of way. And so I'm struck by the fact that that's happening as well in the diaspora, and, giving you a sense of community that has been, fraught or difficult or challenging previously. And, I want to talk about this kind of transnational piece, but also maybe if you could briefly, first let me say to those of you tuning in on the YouTube channel, please, if you have questions or comments that you'd like our panelists to address, if we have time, we can take those up. So please feel free to post them. We have about 30 minutes left, and but I wanted to sort of ask you about maybe some of the challenges, or that part of the revolutionary moment. And this has been true of other moments, I think, in the past couple of decades in Iran, but at least this attempt at leaderlessness, right? A kind of rejection of this ideological positioning, or the heroic revolutionary male leader. This attempt at sort of horizontalism that we, saw, in the 1 million signatures campaign and the Green Movement, and, very emphasized in this moment in even a kind of broader, deeper way, because as you're talking about, the focus on ethnicity, the focus on sexuality, the focus on gender, the focus on lots of different, kind of political actors. Can you talk about, your sense of that ethos of leaderlessness? Has that been sustained on the ground in Iran? And to what extent is that reflected also in the work you're doing in the diaspora? One or two or all of you can speak to that.
I think I can go briefly about this leaderlessness within movement building, because Feminist for Jinnah Network is quite a leaderless movement active in diaspora, and it's emphasizing on the leaderless and the non-hierarchical structure quite so much, because when we want to practice solidarity building and movement building, we need to start from ourselves. So we need to think and envision a democratic society from macro level as well. Regarding the leaderlessness of this movement, it's been ongoing for years, I think, because women's and other marginalized bodies' resistance has been leaderless. We have the Girls of Angalabe Street movement that was a leaderless movement. There were no big names there. Of course, the other women's campaigner have tried to co-opt certain women's activism, but at the same time, those that are that are protesting and fighting for their rights on the streets in Iran have never kind of claimed a big name or a leadership for themselves. So this unheroic aspect or leaderless aspect of these movements that have been connected to each other is also, as you say, is also kind of a reminder of this feminist aspect of this movement, but which resonates both from inside the country with all these leaderless subjects that are becoming political more and more, and this diasporic kind of activism that tries to stay as non-hierarchical as possible.
I want to add something to what Samojan said. I see Feminists for Gina and their radicalism, I see them as the leader, within the movement, as a group. So I think while sorry, there's so much noise in the background. So while, within the group work, we emphasize on okay, maybe, is it too loud? Can you hear me? Okay, but I think the position that Feminists for Gina hold within the movement itself is in a position of leadership.
So, I mean, I think that's a really important and interesting thing to raise, that it's not about, sort of, no one can sort of guide or move, but it's about this ethos that you're talking about of sort of, democratic participation and relationship building. Let's talk a little bit about, you've all raised already the kind of ways in which this has kind of sparked new conversations transnationally, particularly global South to global South conversations. And we were really struck by that a year ago when we did the panel, sort of beginning days, heard from and were struck by the kind of excitement that many feminists in the global South felt around this uprising. And it seemed to also offer them permission to articulate something they've long been articulating, and that you all and Iranian feminists have been articulating, which is a nuanced position that's not just about a change in government only, or a kind of focus on imperialism, but kind of bringing all of that together, really situating what the struggle is about on all these different levels. And there seemed to be this new moment of not worrying, that you're either going to feed into the neoconservative, hawks that want to, in the US, that want to intervene in Iran, or you're going to, sort of apologize for the regime somehow. So there was a freedom or permission, as you're saying, to really, just push the politics that have been emerging in so many spaces in the global South that are, very deep and nuanced and can kind of hold all these critiques together. And I wonder if you could speak to that. It sounds like, from what you've said, you're still finding that there is this moment of being able to articulate this radical and deep transnational feminist, very global South, sort of regionally influenced politics And yeah, maybe just if you could speak to that a little bit about your thoughts on this, the kind of potential for these transnational connections.
Okay, I'll go. I think personally, I have learned a lot from Black feminist movements. Certain people from, Bell Hooks to Audre Lorde, to many other names that, have been practicing this kind of anti-racist, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, etc., practices, within, well, this is like an example in the Western countries, but also being able to build connections. I was recently reading a couple of interviews by Angela Davis, and her talking about the way that she was trying to kind of understand how she could build a connection to both the Egyptian feminist movement, especially at a time, we're talking about specifically also like that moment of the Arab Spring, but also prior to that, and also the connection, let's say here, between like the Black BLM movements to Palestine, right? So I feel like there is, again, a lot of examples, a lot of ways that we can use other practices that has been going on for many, many years in terms of building these kind of transnational intersectional feminism between different geographical places, between different struggles, and seeing it as struggles that, again, for all of us to be free, we need to make sure that we're all free, right? So building these networks, I think, an important way to do that. So I again personally think that there is a lot that we can look into and learn from these kind of practices, and watching the kind of work that a lot of from Feminist for Gina to other groups have been doing in terms of collective building, movement building that is not focused on one thing. We're thinking about environmental degradation, we're thinking about economy, we're thinking about obviously patriarchy and marginalized and other like ethnicities, etc. So yeah, I feel like that's something that gives me a lot of hope in terms of what we are already doing and what we can continue to get also better at.
Thank you. I think our major issue at this point is to decide on our relationship with power. And I think right after revolution, right after the uprising, the Gina movement revolution, it was so one of the main issues, one of the questions that people from Iran were asking is like, what is the alternative? What alternatives do we have? And there are no alternatives. And I believe Iranian feminists are in the best position to offer that alternative, considering the environmental crisis, which has already influenced Iran significantly. There are almost 35,000 villages have been depopulated because of water crisis. And our only way to survive as not only in Iran, but as, as human species, is to embrace feminist values, which is, not only environmental justice, but awareness, solidarity, inclusivity, intersectionality, which changes our perception about the way we relate to world and one another. It's almost impossible to now not think intersectional. So believing that we are in that position, that we are in the position to offer the best political alternative, I discussed this matter to some of feminist friends, and we founded a group called Feminists for Freedom in Iran. And hopefully we just added in Iran because we're hoping it's going to be Feminists for Freedom in MENA. And the idea significantly relies on the resources of the global feminist movement. I mean, a feminist movement is the most powerful movement of modern history. I mean, that network that we have. So if we create that network, and if we get the international support of feminists with the theory we have, with all the practice, with the abolitionist movement, that it shows us what it means to have structural change within the system. I think if we use everything we have, we can really, if we get together, if we have that feminist unity globally, there's no force that can really overpower us.
I can only agree with Esha Moreshin, because I think regarding the transnationality and the transnational importance of the feminist demands and the feminism that we want to practice is key, because of the climate change and the multiple crises that are happening globally. And it reminds me of this internationalist gathering in Berlin that I attended as part of this Feminist for Jena network. And the title was quite telling, and I think it was one of the most beautiful titles for an event. And it was Feminism Beyond Equality, Feminism Reclaiming Life. So what it says, it actually wants us to kind of reconsider this sort of feminism as this individualistic sort of empowerment for certain individuals. So feminism is not just about empowerment or individual empowerment. It's also about, and mostly about, social and political transformations and structural change. And by this, we need to unite through the Global South, mostly through the Global South struggles and demands mostly. And there were a lot of collectives in Berlin, as an example, people like Veronica Gogo, or multiple activists from different Global South countries in Brazil. And it was quite striking, the kind of demands and the kind of problems we were addressing, the social reproduction kind of problem, the crisis of care, and the climate change, and all of this, and how feminism should respond to these globally and in an internationalist kind of unity. Not unity in the sense that all of our struggles should be united in a conformist way, but also in a sense that in our multiplicity and difference, we are fighting for same causes and for same kind of struggles. And it is crucial to find each other in multiple ways, and to form movements together and to learn from each other's experiences, because our struggles are shared, and our enemies are quite alive and active all around the world.
I mean, I hope that the audience is feeling as sort of moved and inspired as I am. I mean, that I can't think of a better way to sort of end than what the three of you have articulated for us. And I love this idea that, as Aisha said, it's feminism that will save us as a planet, as a world, as a group of people who share so many of the kind of precarious conditions that we're all facing. So thank you so much for your beautiful comments and ideas, and for the work that you're doing. And I'm glad that you're finding each other, and I'm glad that we're all finding each other in this moment. And thank you to the audience for tuning in and for finding us here. And we hope we can have many more of these kinds of conversations. So thank you so much to each of you, and keep up the great work. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so
much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm assuming the live recording has stopped, but maybe.
No, I don't think it has. Hold on.
Okay. Or has the broadcast ended?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think we may just have to close out the window and end the call. I'm not sure how.
Okay,
Yeah.
I can do that, but I hoped that we'd have a little time, but thank you guys so much, and we'll all reconvene at some point.
Yes, it was really good. Mora Shinjan, it was really happy to see. I'm a big fan, and I hope to see you in LA.
Been a while.
Same.
And you too.
Same
So
here.
nice to also
Nice
meet
to see you.
Sama and Catherine. Thanks so much for
Yes.
being here. And until then, let's stay in touch. I'm gonna message you later.
Thank you, Catherine John. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone,
Thank
so
you all.
much. Take good care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.